I'm Aidan. I'm 17 years old.
I'm Sara, and I'm 87 years old.
Yes, and today we're going to be talking about the founding fathers, specifically George Washington, with respect to our 70-year age gap, as well as just the different perspectives that you get on a lot of these mystical figures in our history, to say the least.
And I have, at 87, I had to dig deep on my memory to understand how I got George Washington mixed up. And I really have not mixed up in respect to my memory. So I'm talking about my grammar school days, and I dug deep, and I remember they're saying George Washington was the founding father, which we all agree we were taught, and I understood that he chopped down the cherry tree, and he was very truthful with his father and confessed that he chopped down the tree. Now, I know and I respect what they taught me was tell the truth as you did it. And George Washington told the truth. That's it.
It's almost a parable in a way.
In a way.
Yeah.
And not till I was 87 years old did I read a complete historical version of George Washington and his career as a founding father. And it is so different from what I had remembered. And I thought to myself, do the teachers at that time are limited in their ability to teach, or they assumed that we were not able to understand the impact of his founding father? And that's the question. I thought if I saw a picture when I was that age of their feat of the army, which they discussed thoroughly in this historical account, that they were lacking shoes and they marched considerably long distances, I would have gotten the flavor of what was going on with the war. But I was limited in what I was taught. But I have a trick in my mind that I wasn't taught anything beyond he chopped the cherry tree and confessed to his father. In the historical account that I read not too long ago, George Washington was a man of considerable wealth, and he enjoyed the luxuries of life and even carried them into the camp and chose the nicest house and entertained lavishly. But he also rode a horse very well, and he was a very interesting man in himself when it came to his plantation. He delved, no, I should correct myself. He used his energy, even though he was a general and he supervised the armies, he always looked back at his plantation, and he had a superiority complex when it came to recognizing the New England patriots who fought alongside him. He looked down his nose, and his patriotic attitude towards them was less than equal. And he successfully defended Boston and the area, and then committed the army to a long, long march to New York, and in where they met the English, and they met the English, who arrived in 400 different boats or ships, etc. And there was a confusion among the patriots and non-patriots who inhabited New York, and there was not a successful campaign in New York, New Jersey. And turn it over to Aidan.
Yeah. Wow. That was a lot on Washington. Yeah. I mean, even hearing you go over like kind of his war legacy also makes me think a lot about whether or what's the obsession of trying to teach him as like a perfect figure. And I wonder that with every figure, but specifically the founding fathers of the United States, why they have to be these perfect images. I think them being these nuanced people are what makes them interesting. Like I think the fact that George Washington
totally misleading.
Right. And I think the fact that George Washington was, has failed. George Washington was a profiteer of slavery, but he was also at the same time
patriotic.
Right, and he was the only founding father to emancipate his slaves at the end of his life, and he was, the first president. And to quote Napoleon, Napoleon says if Washington, this is kind of a brief overview of what he said, but if Washington steps down from the presidency, he'll be the greatest man to ever live, because he set that precedent of not becoming a king. And I don't know, I think it's more interesting whether when you take those things into account with the nuance of his failures, and I don't know why we try to
balance them out.
Yeah, or we don't even try to balance them. We just completely, or at least for younger
Ignore
audiences,
them.
completely wash them out. Yeah. He has to be, like Honest Abe and Washington that cut down the cherry tree, you know? And I love the stories about Washington where it's not about that.
But he was an interesting, reluctant leader.
Yes.
He didn't want to be in that position.
Yeah. What's interesting about Washington that his first experience with war as, you know, the American general, he fought in Indian
Yes,
and French related disputes, but
before.
you know, being an American general, he was not very great, which, you know, is always. I know when I first told you that, you were like, oh my gosh, you know, this book was telling me that too. But at that same time, it's always about what the spirit of George Washington and the Revolution was, is rewriting what being great means. You know, Washington on paper sucked at war, but him, you know, using guerrilla tactics, knowing when to retreat.
When did you find that out?
I learned that from a class.
Yeah.
I had great teachers my whole time in high school. It seems that, you know, the current state of education that I've got to experience, which I'm very fortunate, is that we get a lot of people passionate about history and passionate about English and passionate about just the humanities in general that, you know, they don't feel like they want to lie. You know, they think these stories are as interesting as whether nuanced or leaning negative or not. But
why don't they teach the hang-ups of the common
I think
leader?
I mean, I think in a weird way, it always boils down to people wanting to have a perfect character. I think it also has due to something left over from, you know, humans' natural appeal to like religion and a god. And I think that we all naturally want to like deify people that represent us, and it's hard to.
We want a total leader.
Right, we all want a Jesus Christ and
Yes.
everything we look for, you know, and that's why we get the George Washington being you cutting the cherry tree. We get the Honest Abe. We get the you know, all these American historical figures. You know, like when most children, even my age right now, most teenagers, you tell them who was JFK, all they can tell you is that he was the handsome guy that got shot. You know,
God.
and that's just the reality. I think we all, you know, search for a deified character and things that we think represent us. And, you know, what else represents, you know, the good old American values than George Washington?
What are the values that they taught you in high school?
To be honest, high school's always been really philosophical for me. Like, they never gave you an answer. It was like, they would tell you, this is what this guy believes in. Whether you believe it or not is different, which I very much respect. I've always had a very retracted education in terms of like how politicized it was. It was never, these are good values. Like, for example, when we learned about socialism, which is a raunchy word can be, we didn't learn that Karl Marx was wrong. We learned that Karl Marx was this man who believed this thing, who had this life, which caused all these things to happen, and it was up to us to decide what we believed.
But that was in an accelerated class.
Right, which opens up another issue, but can't go down that route. This video will be extra long if we went down that route. But
we're talking about George
Washington. Yeah, like I said, I always love seeing. When I was younger, it was kind of hard to learn a lot of the things, and I was victim to the same agitation with finding out Washington was, you know, this slave owner or this failure and this and that, like everybody else, because it's, you know, if this guy's a pure representation of our country, you know, republicanism, democracy, all these things, and he owned slaves, or he wasn't really that good at war, or he was a shy person, and all these things, I'm like, well, what does that mean for the country? But now that I'm older and I'm learning more things about history in general, and also like the nuances of our government and all these things, I like those stories. And, you know, I like learning that, you know, George Washington didn't have it all figured out. And these guys, you know,
he was human.
Right, extremely human. And I think there's more things to say about the nuances of these characters in like 2025 than how they were teaching it, in the 50s, 60s, 70s of him being this deified figure.
Indifferent. And that's a subject unto itself.
Yeah, of course.
But there is a heavy duty moral in teaching my youthful 88 years old, and in telling the truth, that's what was important at that time. And I think that the moral issue of telling the truth it's debatable in respect to understanding why they taught that, and understanding what they influenced the children about.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different discussion.
I can agree on that. I think, like you said, telling the truth was important, but I think at the same time, having absolute truth was weighed more than a nuanced truth. That's why they wanted him to be this figure. But down to the nitty gritty of Mr. George Washington, I think it's valuable to learn the full picture.
And I think if I had studied the pictures then, when I was in grammar school, and they taught from the pictures, they could show the army as it really was, composed of farmers, tradesmen, etc., and they were poorly uniformed, and they were ragtag.
Yeah, and George Washington himself was really not a pretty sight to look at. He had his wooden teeth, and he was this, he was like 6 foot, so he's like huge back then, this huge British guy with wood teeth screaming at you in the woods. I mean, I would be pretty terrified, but...
The army was very interesting.
Yeah.
But that's another discussion of whole time. There were ragtag, but they were patriots, and that is very interesting. Who were they? And the farmers came off the field, and the tradesmen laid down their hammers, and they joined the army for what and why? And they didn't even get a clean uniform.
Yeah. I guess my natural question for you regarding to that is, do you think something like that could still exist now? People putting down their trades to join up in the face of patriotism being low?
It existed in World War II, but didn't exist in wars after that.
Yeah.
Because I think the government had a lot to do with explaining why the young men had to go to war.
Yeah. It seems the common theme is absolutisms.
Yes.
People wanting to, fighting an absolute evil in the Nazi party, or fighting once you finally at the war starting with the revolution, fighting an absolute good deed of becoming a self-determined country and all these
What
things.
wars after World War II had that absolute?
Pretty much none.
No.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of a resurgence of that with the War on Terror, but that died very fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Washington was a gentleman, and he didn't understand his army. And
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories about Washington is when, I don't know the years or the names of the story, so I might butcher the story a little bit. But, he's with his army, and they're in, like, this canyon during the winter, and in war back then, you wouldn't fight in the winter. You guys would just wait out the 4 or 5 months, until things started to bloom a little bit. So they're sitting in this valley. They're getting destroyed by the British because, it's the most powerful army in the world at the time.
they sailed in 400 ships into New York Harbor.
Exactly. And it's just this ragtag group of farmers, and they're all sitting here, and this French general comes, and he trains Washington's troops in 3 months. And I think I love that story because, it not only takes George Washington down a little bit, down a few steps, but also shows that Washington was also willing to learn and to adapt and to accept, the French's help, which gets dicey when they have their own revolution and we don't help them. But that's a different conversation.
Oh, God.
But yeah, I think it's definitely very interesting. That's one of my favorite stories I was ever told about Washington because it completely breaks like the canon that they try to show you.
And we acknowledge through the years the teaching has changed. And I think it's for the best.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's still value in, the parable stories, but I don't know if we need to, teach Washington like that ever. I don't think he needs to be the center of the stories anymore,
Except we need a leader. And we truly need a leader.
Yeah, it seems to be a dying art these days.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it for Washington.
I think we did pretty good on Washington this time around.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. If we missed anything about Washington, please make sure to let us know in the comments or fact check us at all.
Critique us.
Yes, critique us. Tell us you know nothing about Washington. You guys are absolutely wrong. But yeah, let us know if you have any more topics you guys want us to talk about, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.